so please continue to talk amongst yourselves.
Emily, you don't see us yet.
Everyone, welcome. Welcome to our keynote panel discussion for the 2023 TACA Perforum. Those of you who were here at the start of the day already know who I am, but for those of you just joining, my name is Maura Scheffler. I am the Donna Wilhelm Family President and Executive Director of TACA, the Arts Community Alliance. For those of you who are just joining us via our KERA live stream, we are so glad you were able to tune in. Those of us who were here today have done a lot together already. We've been on a journey, or several journeys. We've had moderated community conversations where we talked about times when we have felt othered, times when we have felt that we belonged and what that impact was for all of us, how belonging and othering show up in our respective organizations or creative work. We did some speed networking, not to be confused with speed dating, though if that happens too, we don't have any objections. And we had space for folks to just connect around the edges if they wanted to informally get to know others over a cup of coffee downstairs in the lobby. Now we come together for this keynote discussion where we hope to weave several of these threads that we've heard today together. As many of you know, in the last decade, TACA has begun a transition from grantmaker to a comprehensive arts service provider for this community with grant-making programs, capacity building and professional development, and thought leadership programs. Perforum sits at the intersection of capacity building and thought leadership. How can we learn together? And how can we dream together? Over its years, Perforum has served a valuable purpose for both TACA and for this community. It's been an opportunity to come together about areas of challenge or opportunity that we all share and see, opportunity to think big together, a place to think about future strategies we can employ to get us all where we collectively want to go. And it's also been a place for TACA to listen to those ideas and to think about how we can support your work and your needs as an arts community. For those of you who have been with us for many Perforums, or if you read your program book, you will see that over the years there's been a recurrence of themes around equity, diversity, and inclusion. This year we focus on belonging, which is related but not quite the same. In 2021, John Powell, who is the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, wrote an article in the Nonprofit Quarterly in which he says the following, quote, "To belong is not just to be a citizen or member in the weakest sense, but to be able to participate in co-creating the thing you belong to. That makes it different than inclusion." He also goes on to say this, quote, "The Constitution of the United States starts off with the issue of addressing who belongs, we the people. Most of the people in the land that was to become the United States of America were not included in that we. To be in the we was to belong, and therefore participate in creating the society and in creating the meaning that was attached to that belonging. Being outside of that we was to be othered." So, the roots of belonging in this melting pot of our country go deep. And they have meaningful and profound implications on both our society and on arts and culture as a reflection and expression of that society. As part of our keynote conversation today, we have two national leaders with us, Janelle Thompson of Museum Hugh in New York City, and Sixto Wagan from the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund in Houston, and our very own Director of the Office of Arts and Culture, Ms. Martine Philippe. I'm going to give each panelist about, oh yeah, I love a good round of applause. I'm going to give each panelist about 10 minutes to talk about themselves, their work, and the role of belonging in it. And then we'll move into discussion and open it up, of course, to all of you to answer all of your questions. So Janelle, I'd like to start with you. Janelle Thompson is the Research and Partnerships Manager at Museum Hugh in New York. Museum Hugh is a leading organization dedicated to advancing Black, Indigenous, and all people of color in the cultural field. They have over 400 institutional members representing cultural and academic institutions from across the United States. Prior to her work at Museum Hugh, she worked in strategic partnerships at the MoMA PS1 in Long Island City. She's also worked in politics as a legislative intern for the New York State Senate. I went back. And Janelle has undergraduate degrees in political science and sociology and a master's in museum studies from the City University of New York's School of Professional Studies. So Janelle, will you please do us the pleasure of talking about yourself, your work, and the role belonging has played in that?
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Janelle Thompson. As you've heard, I'm from New York City. Immigrated to Brooklyn when I was a toddler from Jamaica with my family. Grew up in Brooklyn, currently live in Harlem. I'm the Research and Partnerships Manager at Museum Hugh. For those listening, I'm going to give a visual description. I am a dark-skinned Black femme. I'm wearing a bright red lipstick and a chunky gold necklace, and I have on a white short-sleeve button-down shirt. I want to first and foremost thank TACA so much for having Museum Hugh and myself here today to speak about our work. This is my first time in Dallas, so it's really been an incredible experience to get an introduction to the city through its arts and cultural community. Really just grateful to everyone who made this symposium possible. Thank you to Morgana, who has been, my like tour guide and, an amazing person during my time here. So very grateful for your care and labor. So as I shared, I grew up in New York City. And I think there's often a misconception that, when you grow up in a city like New York City, you're very exposed to all of the incredible museums and cultural institutions, but unfortunately I was not. I didn't go to my first museum until I was about in high school. And that experience was really transformative for me because I was like, oh my God, there are like curators, and there are all of these people who like work in this field, and I had no idea really that that was like a career path that I could take. And I think coming from an immigrant family, it was like you could be a doctor or you could be an engineer. There weren't really many other career paths that were exposed to us. And so when I sort of stumbled upon an after-school program at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, and I kind of got exposed to that through a friend's mom who worked there. I was just truly amazed and kind of realized that this was a field that I really wanted to continue to be a part of and work in. However, there were a lot of difficulties that I had to navigate in order to kind of get to working at an institution. And so as a professional of color, really a lot of what I think about in my work is really how I can take my experience from not really being exposed to arts and culture from a young age and really think about how I can begin to build those partnerships for my own community in the work that I do. And so for the art of belonging, I think belonging has been in the lexicon for the past several years, especially as we continue to think about how to move the field towards greater equity and inclusion. And as I was reading and preparing for this, there was a quote, a Zapatista quote, that was like, the world we want is one where many worlds fit. And so just to go back a little bit to Museum Hugh, people often ask, where is your museum located? We are not a museum. As Maura already talked about, Museum Hugh is dedicated to uplifting the voices of people of color in the arts and culture field, and we celebrate cultural diversity and work to improve racial inequity in the field and promote people of color's cultural contributions and artistic practices. And as I was sort of coming into the field, Museum Hugh was one of the only organizations that were thinking about professionals of color and our experience in the field, and now there are definitely a lot of others. So, it's kind of a full circle moment for me to now work at this institution and to be able to continue to push forward our work and think about how to support professionals of color in the field and keep us in the field. And so when I think about the presence and voices of professionals of color, our voices are really vital to moving our organizations towards a place of belonging. Our organization should reflect the diversity of our cities and our society as a whole. And as professionals of color who often bring the insight and perspectives, lived experiences, and strategies that allow for organizations to become more welcoming and inclusive. And a key to moving our organizations closer to belonging is having a workforce representative of the communities that we want to belong. And so over the last few years, Museum Hugh has been at the forefront of two extensive research projects, Hugh Arts New York City and New York State, and those projects amplify and celebrate the work and mission of arts and cultural entities founded and led by Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, and all people of color arts entities throughout New York City and New York State. And so this was really a map, directory, report, and platform that highlighted all of these organizations. And really, I think one thing that sort of sparked the creation of these two research projects was throughout the pandemic, a lot of folks were like, we want to support more organizations of color, and, how do we do this work? Where are they? We don't know how to identify them. We don't know how to partner with them. And so we were like, okay, here's a map of all of them across the city, across the state. Here's their mission. Here's what they do. Here's how to get in touch with them. And so this report also included recommendations from the leaders of color across the state to really address government officials, policymakers, founders, and funders, and other stakeholders, really understand what is needed for organizations of color to really thrive long term. And through the research, we were able to showcase that arts and cultural entities founded and led by Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, and all people of color, already leading the way and are shining examples of how to work in the spirit of belonging because of their community-centered approaches and practices. One of the big things that came out of the report was that organizations of color are often providing wraparound services. So what that means is they are, during the pandemic, they became a site for a food pantry and free food fridges. They provide youth programming, child care services, support services for elders in the community, and they really seek to address barriers that impedes folks' ability to show up and fully participate. They understand that if you're worrying about how to get to a program or an event, that's going to affect your ability to feel like you can actually be your authentic self. I think even specifically in New York, when I was doing a lot of cultural programming and community engagement work, we always made sure we had food at all of our programs and events, made sure we provided folks with Metro cards so they can get to the program and back. If you have children, when you think about getting everyone there to the program, the costs add up incredibly quickly. And so, these are things that we often thought about in terms of these are barriers and we don't want people to have to worry about that. And so what can we do to meet people's needs in advance to ensure that they can be a part of our programming and community. And so before my role at Museum Hugh, I worked as a cultural programmer and on community engagement initiatives. And some of the ways it has taught me to forefront belonging in my work, as I was just mentioning, of course, paying people. I think when I worked at the museum, they were in a place where they had not really been intentional about engaging with the neighborhood right around them. And so when I came on to work there, we were like, okay, we need to do focus groups, we need to have community conversations and sort of learn about the history and the ways in which the institution has harmed or ignored the community, and everyone who participated was paid for their time. And I think that is so important, particularly for communities of color and organizations of color. It's they have this expertise, and we often look to them to fit these boxes in terms of allowing us to be more diverse institutions or inclusive institutions. They need to be paid for their expertise and their perspective. Always do your research. I think one thing I really try to think about is to identify, stakeholders in that community who people really look to and really trust, to sort of learn about pain points in the community. I really love to go into partnerships with the spirit of curiosity, and I think the word co-creation is really beautiful, leaving room to really dream and ideate, leaving rigidity and set parameters at the door, and also really understanding that belonging and really moving in that spirit takes time. As someone said earlier, it's not a destination, it's something you continuously practice. It requires intentionality and really constructing policies and practices at your institution that really can begin to shift and change the culture. And it can't just be the folks who are working with these communities directly. It also it has to be every department. It has to be the security guards. It has to be the board. One example I can sort of give to that is we were working with an artist, a queer artist, and we have been doing a lot of work sort of, ensuring and making sure that the artist felt welcome. But then the artist came to do a visit with some other artists, and the security at the entrance misgendered them. And so it's things like that sort of unravels a lot of the work that you often do because everyone is not moving in that same spirit. And so, I think, again, it goes back to ways in which you're being intentional and making sure that those policies are across your organization and your institution. But yeah, I think I'm well over my 10 minutes, so I will stop there. But I'm looking forward to continuing on these threads with my fellow panelists here. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. I appreciate and heard a lot of the themes you just said in some of our community conversations upstairs about meeting needs, about co-creation, about how do we need to be flexible and leave, I like what you said, leave rigidity at the door when we think about how do we create spaces of belonging. Sixto, I'd like to turn to you next. So Sixto is currently the project director of the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund in Houston, which seeks to revolutionize the local funding landscape, break down silos within the arts ecosystem through grant funding, advocacy, and community engagement programs. Prior to his work at BAMF, as it is often called, he founded the Center for Art and Social Engagement at the University of Houston. He also served in many roles at DiverseWorks, artistic director, co-executive director, performing arts curator. I feel like there's like 5 more titles that I'm missing. Look at his bio or in his LinkedIn. DiverseWorks is a contemporary arts center in Houston. During his tenure there, he nurtured artists, communities, and emerging arts organizations through commissions and place-based initiatives. Sisto, tell us about your work, who you are, and the role belonging has played.
Thank you all so much. I'm Sixto Wagon. He, him pronouns. Visual description is I present as a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a graying beard. I also am of Filipino descent, and I am wearing a black shirt with great polka dots. I'm not sure if you can all see that. And I'm also sporting some ombre metallic nails. So please forgive me, as I'm going to be attached to my iPad and my notes. If we were on Zoom, they'd be on the teleprompter, nobody know difference. But now, here we go. And thank you all, and thank you, TACA. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for approaching the idea of belonging, because this is complex. It is not simple. It is not easy. And the idea of actually addressing it, attacking it, and actually being part of that practice is really exciting. And actually, it's great to understand that you all are actually at this point. As a person who's been in Houston for 30 years, I'm like, why is Dallas doing this? And we ain't talking about it, but that's a whole other conversation. Before I connect to my work to the theme of the conference, I'm going to share an understanding of how I come to understand belonging and what defines it. My parents are immigrants from the Philippines, who, in an effort to make a home in St. Louis, Missouri, co-founded a nonprofit that used Filipino folk dance and food to educate, connect, and build a space of welcome. My own sense of belonging came through queer performance in the mid-90s, through a Schools Out, the naming project, guided by Mary Ellen Strom and Barbara Brickert, with other artists Nelson Rodriguez, Prudence, Diana, Maddie, and Ronnie. Other queer youth at that point, and some of them who are no longer with us. I also learned from the 5 lesbian brothers, Luis Alfaro, Brian Freeman, about collective practice. I also need to name Daima Mubashir, who is the co-founder with me of QUAC, the Queer Artists Collective. We were a group of 20-something young artists in the mid-90s who tried to create a community because our mentors had died. They were gone from AIDS, or they were exhausted from the AIDS crisis and the culture wars. My work is informed by those who chose to make opportunity in the face of a gap, who transmute crisis into an opportunity, who build a community and then the energy and effort it takes to support and maintain it. I also name that I value lived experience and collective work as essential data in order to form practice, and that there's an importance of self-defined success as an important part of agency and accountability. So in my decades of work at DiverseWorks, I started there when I was 6, right? So 17 years at DiverseWorks. I had every title except visual arts director. I had every task known, including official ones as co-executive director, fundraiser, curator, and then also I was the website maintenance person, the hanging and focusing lights. I ran the light board, sound board, you name it, we did it. Oh, also, of course, we cleaned the toilets. So See, some of y'all all know this aspect. And those of y'all who don't remember it, I suggest you talk to your staff. Anyway, these experiences give me some understanding of the joys and the difficulties of what it takes in order to maintain and run a small nonprofit organization. The value is definitely clear in the successes that happen with the artists and with the audiences, with the residencies, and maintaining an organization that stayed open, throughout many crises. It was also essential knowledge when I had the privilege to sit at funding tables or other leadership spaces that had access to resources. I leveraged the fact that hiring me was demographic bingo. I am a queer of color. At that time, I was also of a younger generation. I'm artist identified, and that my education and elocution actually gives me access, and I am an acceptable person. I am also part of the South, but not part of the South. And it was in those spaces in which, faced with white, Western, educated, cis, heteronormative, coastal preferences, that I finally understood what my responsibility was to my communities and how I represent. I learned how and when to educate, when to speak up, and when to speak out. It required me to maintain a relationship with my communities so that I could be accountable to all of those people and make sure that I relied on those relationships in order to, so that I understood and that that I was listening and that they could actually call me out in criticism and in joy. Those places of power and privilege continue. I am now not the only Asian to be called on, but at that time, I was one of the only few Asians working in those spaces in order to be like, you can do that. For those of you who are one of the only people who are called on, please remember the power and the privilege of those spaces, and please build a roster of the people that can actually do that work instead of you, for you, and with you. So I continue to invest in those long-term relationships, and I also named programmatically what that meant to me in terms of long-term relationships, is that I changed the way that we commissioned our projects. We invited artists for a 3-year project, and the artists needed to make a 3-year commitment to a community. The first year was actually a space in which the artist and the community would ideate, learn, have meals, have meetings. The second year was a year for workshops, showings, dinners, food again. And the third year would be about a performance. How would we actually culminate in a celebration? And how could we have the talkbacks? And how could the audiences actually be able to celebrate with the audience, with the artists, and with diverse works, what we actually experienced together? Part of this process was a process of defining success. What did it mean for success for diverse works? What did it mean for the artists? And how did we make sure that we shared that success with the audiences? Success is not a goal, but a process. At my time at University of Houston, it was a manifestation of my commitment to bringing different parts of our ecosystems into conversation, to vision a 21st century city that we all belong to and that we were responsible for. The public programming manifested in a Leadership in the Arts Summits, and then the partnership with the Project Row Houses that created the research fellowships in community practice. I'm sharing those briefly because not that because they were unimportant, because they have fully manifested in the work that I'm now doing with the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund. So, BIPOC Arts Network and Fund and BAMF is an initiative there we go, is an initiative, there we go, connected to the Ford Foundation's America's Cultural Treasures. We are currently a $12.5 million 5-year hyper-local response where the Houston Endowment accepted the challenge from the Ford Foundation and other national funders in order to rise to the moment of the global pandemic and the resurgent racial justice and accountability movement after the murder of George Floyd. So Long Chu, who is the Arts and Program Officer at Houston Endowment, activated a network of funders who had been in conversation after Hurricane Harvey. So Crisis brought those funders together, and Crisis again brought them together. The initial response that we created was based in crisis response, but it was also a means in order to address historic disparities and underfunding to organizations and communities of color. So again, we are talking about opportunities built from crisis or a gap, the intentional choice to create space for empowerment, dreaming, and creation, and all of this is based on relationships. Instead of building another philanthropic-driven program, the funders invested in this experiment that ceded power to those who are most directly affected. So the leadership of the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund actually are community leaders, artists, arts organizational leaders, and myself, and foundation officers. It is important in order to name this because we are building a commitment to each other and building a commitment to our community. We recognize each other's importance in the sector in order to build a future arts ecosystem that values equity, uplifts and celebrates community cultural capital, and builds systems of support that are responsive to the current and future needs of stakeholder networks. Some of the things that we have instituted in the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund, and that's only been in the past 2 years. So there are community-led design teams for funding programs, where it's non-project-based funding. It's community-inclusive review processes, which included a Black and Latinx-specific panels, community participatory evaluation methodologies, and a commitment to learning communities so that we are naming the constant process of learning, change, adaptation. So one request that I have to all of you all. So all of us have invested a lot of time in strategic planning, strategic visioning, and sustainability processes. But now, after the global pandemic and the repeated weather events, can I ask you not to skip that whole section where you actually figure out what is going on in your ecosystem? Please don't assume that the ways of working now are the same, the ways that working pre-COVID are the ways that are working now. Because I will say that I think it is disrespectful to the 550 million lives to say that their lives were nothing, because if you can just get back to the way it was before. I say this in order to encourage investment and adaptation and resilience thinking. Please focus on the why you are doing what you're doing. Please focus on who are you doing this with. Please make sure that you are talking to those people before you plan their lives for them. I am a firm believer in art and the creative process. I believe in the power of painting, music, dance, song, and poetry, and the vision of artists who often do not know what is going to happen when they start working. I also believe that happens with us as administrators and people who work in the arts community. Make a commitment to not knowing. Make a commitment to being present. Make a commitment to understanding that the work and the relationships that you have, the community that you are accountable for, and all of that knowledge that you have built is actually enough in order to lead us into the next future. I am asking you all, again, to think about the ideas. It is not failure, it is learning. It is creative process where we constantly and continually learn how to do differently, and perhaps different better, and that, you know, sometimes that poem, sometimes that dance, well, luckily, there ain't no video of it. So you can keep on moving. So I think that that's actually the point now with all of us here. We have a moment in order to think about belonging, and how do you actually hold yourself accountable, and how can you hold yourself in care in order to hold and do this work? Thanks.
Thank you, Sixto. We're talking a lot about community and connection and what that really means for us to connect with the communities that we are seeking to connect to. I think we've heard a lot about the ways that we haven't done that we need to, and I think we're probably going to unpack some of those as we go forward. Martine, you became the director of our city's Office of Arts and Culture in December. Prior to coming to Dallas, you were the National Community Art Action Manager at A Window Between Worlds in Los Angeles, which focuses on individuals and communities impacted by violence and trauma through a transformative healing arts program. Martine has worked in arts education and mentorship in Atlanta and across Georgia, and she's also a trained dancer. Would you please talk to us about yourself your career thus far and how that has shaped your perspective on belonging.
Of course. Hey there. I'm really grateful to be here sharing space and stage with my peer panelists here. Thank you for the invitation, Mara. And thank you to those of you who have tuned in, including my mom. As a visual description, I am wearing a very loud lime suit. I'm a black woman, and for those of you who I encounter here and there, you've noted that I wear a gold necklace. This is my father's necklace. It's a Toledo-style cross on that necklace, and this is one of the only artifacts or mementos he has from when he graduated from medical school in Guadalajara. So I wear it every day. It's a reminder that I am his child, that I'm always protected and never alone. And sometimes it clashes, but I'm going to have it on every day. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm now 9 months old in my role. And in thinking about the art of belonging, I thought first, the art of belonging is a dance. I'm a trained dancer. I see my sister dancers are out here in the crowd. And a lot of what brings me to every step of my career has to do with what I learned in dance training. So I'm from New York, like Janelle, and I grew up in Long Island, New York, trained in dance at the Vinette's Cultural Workshop. This organization is rooted in the African proverb that calls out that it takes a village, essentially. And when you think about being a member of a village, you're building in that sense of belonging there. So the aspects of academic training that came along with the artistic training had a lot to do with how you present in mixed company, how you engage with folks who don't look like yourself, how you engage with folks who do look like yourself, and what it means to carry yourself and be graceful and be disciplined and on and on and on. And what I learned that I carried forward most has to do with approaching difficult, challenging matters. And as a dancer, you're trained to do difficult things in a graceful way. So no matter where I've been in my career across the nation in support of folks who are local, national, or international stakeholders in the work that we're doing, I'm always careful to ensure that I'm approaching folks and work in a graceful, thoughtful manner. So left New York, my family left New York, and we transitioned to Georgia. I attended the University of Georgia, which might be a problem for some of y'all in the crowd if you're a football fan. And still maintain a vein of the arts in the work that I was doing. I majored in African American studies there at the University of Georgia, but also presided over Pamoja Dance Company and the African American Cultural Center at that time. Did a lot of work, and this is early 2000s, around community engagement, ensuring that the marginalized community members around Athens, Georgia, had access to arts experiences of free, no cost, access to arts training in the same vein, and thought, like Janelle mentioned, I can't tell my Caribbean parents that I want to be a dancer. Like, my father's a physician, my mother's also in the medical field. Like, this is not going to land well. But this is where I belong. By the gifts that I've been given, this is really where I belong. I need to figure it out so I can go home and tell this man this is what I want to do. So naturally transitioned into dance education and arts education, and served at the Atlanta Public School System as an arts educator mentor and a dance educator, maintaining the same vein of prioritizing the marginalized community members in Atlanta, helping new educators understand what it means to bring children who generally were not exposed to the arts at any stage and phase until they got to your classroom. How great of an opportunity that is for you to be the conduit to introduce a young person to the arts, whether that's you're a musician or a dance educator or a visual arts educator or theater instructor, and how to be really thoughtful and graceful in how you introduce young folks to the world of the arts, because we want to bring you in and keep you, whether you become a patron or you become an artist. So spent a lot of years doing that type of work. And what you learn when you serve the marginalized community is that there's a lot of trauma-informed care involved in that. And there's a lot of learning in the professional vein that you ought to seek out. Because a lot of us care and have a heart of gold, but we might be missing the mark when it comes to the language you should be using, the things you ought to know that you might just be overlooking when you're dealing with folks you may not have parallel or similar experience with. And some of the research that I did, to ensure that I wasn't missing the mark with the community members I was serving, led me to my work with A Window Between Worlds. So I transitioned here to Dallas from that national role at A Window Between Worlds, and that experience in my career trajectory is the single most transformational experience I've had as an adult, number one, and as a professional. So if you look them up, their web page is awbw.org, and the mission has a lot to do with serving as a catalyst for change, using the arts in a non-clinical healing aspect to help folks who have clients. So you're helping providers and training providers to incorporate visual arts integration in the work that they're doing. So we're working with police departments across the nation, some juvenile detention centers in the international sector across South Africa, national domestic violence associations and organizations that serve the unhoused communities, social workers, educators, and on and on. And even recently I sent some of our Office of Arts and Culture staff to a facilitator training. What you learn, whether you work there or you take some of the professional development opportunities they have available, has to do with using invitational language, being welcoming, ensuring that you're not perpetuating any type of violence simply by the way you communicate with folks and the way you choose to engage or try to build bridges with folks. And I think that's something we all in this room can benefit from. It's something you never stop learning how to do. And in the work that I'm doing, I'm, again, always trying to be very careful and graceful about how I approach people. And it matters to me to really continue that dance, right? Learn the dance that is the art of belonging, because we're charged in the work that we do in any city department with making sure that folks feel safe, making sure folks feel welcome, and planting the seeds that make folks feel like they belong here in this city of Dallas. So, I say again, I'm a trained dancer. So I feel very safe when I'm on a stage. I understand that that's not the case for a lot of folks. But the way I approach my thinking is, as a dancer, you're either rehearsing in studio or performing on the stage. So you're either somewhere learning in preparation to facilitate, to perform, and on and on. And that's a lot of the work that I have to do as a director, is a lot of research, a lot of preparation, and you get invited to share, you get invited to counsel, committee to brief, and on and on. So I'm grateful to have that very clear parallel between what I gleaned in dance training and get to bring that forward in service to the city. I'm really, really grateful. Folks ask me all the time, why would you come to Dallas? I'm very new to Dallas. I don't have connections here. I do have one uncle in Richardson. I call him a Mary Kay lady because he retired from Mary Kay Corporate after 40 or some odd years. But he's been up in Richardson, and so anytime we took a family trip, it was DFW straight to Richardson. We didn't spend a lot of time in Dallas proper. But what attracted me to the role had a lot to do with the fact that this municipality was thoughtful enough to craft a racial equity plan, to craft policy and have a formal Dallas cultural plan that really irons out what priorities are noted across the city with stakeholder and community engagement, and what gives our office offices across the city, but specifically the Office of Arts and Culture, some marching orders and goals to deliver on that will benefit the community now and later. And for all that I can do in support of both of those documents, the Racial Equity Plan and the Dallas Cultural Plan, I'm really excited to get to do that during my tenure here. And to round out, again, my dance training, coming out of the COVID years for any arts discipline, it's been really tough. Folks have had to, of course, pivot and be creative in the ways in which they reach audience members. Folks have had to suffer, of course, and lose staff. It's really been hard for our theater organizations to maintain a level of subscriptions they've had, and on and on and on. It's a really, really tough time. But again, I root down into my dance training, and I think about the one time in my experience I was injured and I couldn't dance. 1998, and I'll be transparent, I was a Spice Girls fan. and I had the shoe, whatever those shoes were, and fell and was injured and couldn't dance for a year. And that, some decades later, is still the single worst year of my life because I didn't have that creative outlet. So I think about that every day in my work. What decisions are we making as a municipality, as an office, that are going to negatively impact, whether they're a young person or an old, a patron or a creator? What decision are we going to make that may land in someone's lap and they have that same worst year that I had? Now, of course, I have my Spice Girl shoes on. But we want to make sure that the decisions we make, don't negatively impact the folks that we intend to serve. We are here to enhance the quality of life for the folks who are here in Dallas, for the folks who are looking to visit Dallas, and we're here to elevate this city in the conversation around cultural arts. As a new person as a new Dallasite, it surprises me that we're not hearing more about you outside of the city. And I want to be part of the reason why folks come to learn about all of the great things that are happening in the cultural arts sector here in Dallas. I want to ensure that we maintain great stewardship of the funds that are noted in our budget. And I also want to ensure that we close the loop on what's noted in that plan. Some folks experienced the COVID years as a pause, and some folks don't. But what's most important to me is that we move forward in a thoughtful and graceful way to ensure that our cultural arts sector not only bounces back, but really is set up to thrive. Again, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you, all of you. I think my challenge now is there are so many directions in which I could go. But I think what I want to first ask, so the audience likely doesn't know this, or maybe some of you do. Yesterday, we went on a tour of sites in the city that we felt were important for our panelists to experience as context for today. We don't just want them to come to Dallas and share their experiences, though that's very valuable, and we're very grateful. We also want to show you part of our city. So we went to the walls at Pleasant Grove and met Gaddafi Branch. We went to Sweet Pass Sculpture Park and the Tin District. And we also went to the Design District and visited with Brucewood Dance and with the Kitchen Dock Theater. So I think maybe, and we started and ended at the LCC and talked about that space as an important part of our city, particularly given the Latinx community that we have here. What were your reactions to that tour? What were the things that it really left you all with that resonated as we talk about belonging? Nobody answered too fast.
Okay, so I have not been to Dallas in a long time, and it was good to be able to go and see what has been happening and see different parts of this. I think I was moved by artists and communities doing the work and constantly making the things happen. And both Gaddafi and Sweet Pass. I'm like, need to be very careful where those words go. Anyway, how those things started again by on individual, like how those artists actually funded those things directly for themselves. They did it because they wanted to do it for their communities, with their communities, and then we were able to figure out ways in order to support them. So I think that was actually an ongoing resonance for all of the things that also are happening in Houston, and understanding the importance of an individual and an individual advocates in order to make some things happen. And actually the importance in order for all of us who have access to resources, all of us who actually have access to money, to be thoughtful about where and who we are doing the work, and so that we are able to lift up things that don't look like we have been, that we are comfortable with. that actually engage in places in which that there are questions, engage in communities in which are doing vital work for the communities, even though that we are not of that community and might not understand it in the way that that expression might come forward. I think that it was also exciting and also very much like Houston, like, oh, we get into a car, we get into an automobile or whatever, a bus, and I landed a place. We get into a bus and I landed another place. And I think part of what I also am excited about now is also hearing about the people and the neighborhoods around those places as to how all of these things resonate. Because those projects, those art pieces are not just about they're just not about creating art. It's actually art in conversation with the communities and with all that part. And I think that that's actually one thing that all of us who are working in the arts actually can do a better job of, as to not only name the work that we do, but also be able to be understanding the context and actually bring that context forth with everybody. Share that learning and be the advocate for the people and the artists and that work, so that it is that we understand the connections.
What's arriving for me is, one, the beauty of the Latino Cultural Center. I was really stunned to be there and be able to see a lot of the work of the artists from Dallas and in other areas. One of my questions that I actually had for the folks at the Latino Cultural Center was thinking about diaspora and how do you approach, of course it's the Latino Cultural Center, but there are so many different cultures within the Latino diaspora, and so how do you make space for the different folks in that community to feel like they have a place in the Latino Cultural Center. And from talking to the folks there, the general manager was really talking about how, they make a really concerted effort to invite, what I learned was the Dallas Latino population is largely Mexican, but there are smaller communities here, such as the Puerto Rican community, and so they really make an intentional effort to invite those communities to put on their own cultural events and different things like that, and everyone from the community comes and participates. And so I think that was a really illuminating example for me of, like, that invitation is really one step into that belonging process.
Something that we also, or that I heard up on the community conversation on the 9th floor, was a comment about, as arts organizations, as institutions, we often talk a lot about how we welcome people, but that there's a big gap between welcoming and people feeling as though they belong. That's a much bigger gap than I think many of us want to admit, because we have to get over that gap. And we also talked a lot today and in our conversations leading up today about the needs of communities and having to center those needs more to foster the belonging we seek. So could we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking back to when I worked at PS1. One of the sort of needs that arrived in our neighborhood was the lack of green space, lack of programming space in the neighborhood, and so there was a sort of kind of weird, like, green street space that wasn't really being utilized. People would just kind of park there, and we decided to have a partnership with the Department of Transportation to be like, hey, let's make this a public plaza and utilize it as a space for the community to be able to come and program. And so one thing that we really did and thought about when we were going to program that space was, we want to make it easy for organizations and artists to activate it. And so we thought about, okay, what are our resources as an institution? We took on the labor of going through the permitting process, making sure that we had our staff help the organization set up. We provided snacks and resources and things like that so the artists and organizations could really focus on doing their programming. And so I think in terms of belonging and thinking about, meeting needs and meeting folks where they are is really thinking about how we as an organization can use our resources to take away some of those barriers that get in the way of artists being able and organizations being able to do what they really want to actually do, which is program and connect.
I guess I'll also extend in terms of knowing who you're actually trying to invite and why you're trying to invite them, and making sure that you're not just assuming that everybody, not everybody wants to be at your organization. Sorry. If that's news to you. Well, y'all. Okay, anyway. I do think that, but I mean, it is, who are you trying to reach out to? Why is it a space? And making sure that those invitations that ask, that work is actually personalized and, or knowledgeable in this component. And I think that part of this is, it's hard to think of that I need to focus, that all opportunities, I should do all of these aspects. But all of you all are under-resourced and understaffed. No matter what size of organization you all are, I will assume that you all are under-resourced and understaffed. So why are you going to continue to spend energy and effort in places that aren't where your focus needs to be? Why are you doing things, and why are you trying to chase money or chase an idea that actually isn't tied to the mission or the projects or the programs that you're doing? Because let me tell you, as experience from me, when I've tried to do that with organizations, the communities that I reached out to, when they knew that this was a fake reach out, they called you out on it. If they were nice, they called you out on it in a nice way. If you don't have any respect, they called you out in every other space except to your face. So, in an age when we have social media and all the other things, and you don't know, and you might not be friends with them, they're going to blow up someplace else, and you're just going to have to do a crisis communications. That's not fun. So I'm going to encourage you, again, to invest in why are you doing this? What is in it for your organization, and what is in it for them? That's actually something that you can build together. You can co-create. You can actually understand that this is actually a commitment, because you're making a commitment to a relationship and not just a date. If this is just for this 1 year because you have funding this year, make that obvious too. Make that very clear. I got this grant. I'm going to do, I want to do this, and we do that. And I can tell you, we did, when I was at DiversaWorks, we had this money, we got this grant, it was all great, and then the grant went away, the project went away. They were still asking what happened to their relationship. When I came back 3 years later with a similar project, they weren't talking to me. They did not want to have any more of these conversations because we were burned. They were burned, and it took me 3 years in order to rebuild those relationships. And this is the queer community that I represent and part of. I needed to do all the mea culpas to all this. I needed to show up. I needed to do all those work. But once you actually make that trip, it's going to take a long time and a lot more effort than actually asking them beforehand.
I always appreciate what you share with us. I'm thinking about our office's commitment, as you were sharing about relationships, our commitment to build richer relationships with our stakeholders, have more meaningful communication with the folks who are, in receipt of support, resources, and partnership, managing facilities, on and on, folks who we have relationships with. I look at welcoming, the notion of being welcoming, as the first necessary step. It's baked into the work we do across the city, that, service first, customer service first, all of those tenets that are naturally important. But the next very necessary step has to do with fostering that sense of belonging. From our office's purview, it's a goal that we really need to get clear on what type of strategy and work structure we'll have to implement to ensure that we're visiting that second step from the space of what folks need from us. We need to know what your needs are to foster that sense of belonging. And that has to do with, again, building those richer relationships, really getting a bit deep and not being so surface level in the interaction. Again, I'm only 9 months old, and I can find that a lot of our relationships seem transactional, and that's not, as a woman, as a person, that doesn't suit my personality. And so as a professional working on behalf of the office, I'd like to see a shift in that so that we can have more meaningful engagement with the folks that we're in relationship with across the city.
I am at the point where I can't believe we have 25 minutes until our happy hour. And so I want to make sure that we give all of you a chance to ask questions. I believe there should be microphones somewhere, and if they're not, I'm about to jump off the stage and hand somebody a microphone. But if you have a question that you want to pose to the panel, raise your hand, and somehow we will get a microphone to you to ask that question. Don't everybody raise your hands all at once. Thank you, Clyde.
Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Clyde Valentine. I'm a independent producer here in Dallas, and my question is for Sisto, because I remember when the fund was launched in response to everything you referenced, and it's okay. You took a little jab at Dallas at the top of your talk. It's okay. We're gonna, it's something to point to, right? And so I'm just curious if, in the 2 years that the work has began in terms of engaging communities across Houston, which is a much bigger city, more sprawling but similar, has the research and the learning began to inform levels of sustainability so it isn't a one-time grant? And if so, how is that looking in relationship to your institutional partners, the endowment, the national funders, and so on? If you could just talk a little bit about that infrastructure, because for those of us in the room who engage on the institutional level and think about, ways to support our communities, it does require that village. So if you could just speak on that a little bit, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Clyde, because, we've been doing this work for 2 years, and I can talk to you for 4 hours about the learning, and that's just me talking. You don't even have any questions. I can go ahead and talk about all this because there is so much that's going on. There's so much learning. There's so much that we are trying to do and then adapting from what we're learning with the communities and our organizations. I think that there's many questions that you had asked, Clyde, so I'm going to tackle some of them. One of the things that, our first round of funding was $2 million that went out as crisis relief funds. So within the first 6 weeks of my job, I needed to release a set of criteria, an opportunity, and actually build the infrastructure in order to get $2 million out. And I did it. And then within the first, and then we got that money out by January. One of the things that we were very intentional around was we were doing this in ways in order to spread the work, the money around. That it was a part of the landscape assessment in order to actually create more opportunities. So it wasn't just about 501c nonprofits, but it was also about fiscally sponsored projects, which was radically different from where Kinder Funder, Houston Endowment, and all of the our local foundations work. But it was important in order to create access and create access points that are with communities and with and initiatives that were starting and that didn't necessarily have all the infrastructure. and that how did we actually connect some of those artist projects with fiscal sponsors? How did some of those organizations actually step up in order to be an umbrella organization, in order to understand it was part of their mission and a part of their time, in order to actually be to help other organizations get this money? Those grants were from $5,000 to $50,000. $5,000 doesn't seem like much, but for some of these organizations that have never received any money, that like Gaddafi, have always been doing the work on their own, $5,000 is a whole lot of money. And it was actually we talked to them, because we did, the final report wasn't a final report, it was a listening and learning session. They needed to attend one of them. The fact that we recognized them, that they were recognized outside of their community, that they were on the same list of 120 organizations as the Ensemble and other major institutions that have been like stalwarts of our community. That was significant. And then just being able to be present. We did a listening and learning conversation with all of our organizations, and that helped to define how we were going to be. Like, we had ideas that we knew that we were going to fund individual artists, and we knew that we were going to do Houston, the Cultural Treasures, because that's part of the Ford Foundation thing. But what the learning did also was like, how do we do this? What does it look like? What do those programs look like? And so some of the things that were important were that it was unrestricted funds, that we gave opportunity for networking and for people to connect with each other, that it was about validation and technical support, and it was also an opportunity in order to do a narrative shift, so that the ideas around communities of color and the things that we value were actually needed to be uplifted by the work, and so that what was happening in the small Spanish-only organizations actually could be on the same level as what was happening with the Ensemble Theater, Mecca, and these organizations that have been around for 40 years. I will not say that we are not talking about sustainable funding, because right now we were built as a 5-year initiative, and that as a 5-year initiative, my intention was, how do I take and utilize these opportunities as strategically as possible in order to lift up and name the things that have been happening. Because we'll be clear that all of the work that has been happening in the networks and all these coalitions have been happening in Houston before this fund. It is now an opportunity for us at this fund in order to recognize that, resource it, and name it. And how do we actually utilize our evaluation methodologies and our research tools in order to make sure that all of these things are named in this moment, and how do we share some of those things so that it's not just a report that happens at the end of 5 years, that all of these things are learnings that we continue to activate. So our plan is that in November 2nd, we are going to be announcing the Houston Cultural Treasures, and we will be announcing some of the learnings from year one, in order so that everybody can share to learn. And then we will be building activations around that learning that invite community in order to talk about it. Because let's just say that if we were going to do a report, the first draft of the report was 85 pages. Who's going to read 85 pages? Besides me. So I think that that's the part where, like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to share this information? And how can that happen? I think that, to me also, this is, through the evaluation, through that naming, is actually part, and through the data collection, is actually part of how we are thinking about the shift of funding into sustainable models, or the systems change in that component. Because it is going to be the data, it is going to be all of these components in order for us to say, this is the experiment, this is what we learned. It is now an invitation to our funders, our policymakers, like, are we going to follow this opportunity in this moment that actually took advantage of community learning, that centered equity, that actually brought community voices and paid the community voices at the table? Or are you going to keep on doing the things that you were going to do just because you thought you were going to do it? It's your money. Do what you are going to do with it. But don't tell me that you now don't have the information. Make sure that, for me, you now have the information and you are making a choice to give money the ways that you know were inequitable, that did not actually lift up the people of your communities, or I'm sorry, lifted up and celebrated only certain portions of your community. Those are your choices, and those are now intentional. So, that's my response to the sustainability question.
If you have a question, raise your hand. And while we're getting a mic over there, I mean, a theme of what we've talked about is traditions and structures and policies that we've always seen as we've said, like as we were talking last night at dinner, hard walls that we can't change. What can we move? What can we do differently? I know I have some pride. I mean, TACA is a pretty traditional organization, and I think many would say, and, you know, we had an incredible organization in our community choose to sponsor Gaddafi Branch and the Walls at Pleasant Grove so that we could give them a pop-up grant, because we only grant to nonprofit 501c3s. And so that generosity of that organization, who I will not call out, is incredible. And that we have to make choices to operate in different ways and to question the structures and policies that we have traditionally operated within.
Absolutely, and I ask you to be transparent about those hard walls. Be transparent around those things so that all of us actually understand. And this is actually one of the important parts of how the leadership team is building. Everybody is learning. The artists, the arts organizations are learning from the funders, and really, what is it like to be a program officer within a family foundation? And what does it mean in order to have to lift up all this work within trustees and actually be able to advocate for you when they don't necessarily have all the information that they should have in order to advocate for you? So please do your part too, and not just call them out. Ask them, what do they need? How can you help them do better for you?
I think we had a question here.
Test. Hi, my name is Starla Patterson. I'm the president of the board on Over the Bridge Arts, and then I'm also on the board of the Writers Garret, and I'm rolling off after many years this year to chair the Dallas Lit Festival. So my question is, in all of these years in board membership in these arts organizations, the thing on the front of my mind all the time is how to engage communities of color and just make sure that we are constantly creating these safe spaces, and because both of those nonprofits tell stories. That's what we do, right? So we want to be telling stories of communities of color. And so my question is, just what are your thoughts on whether we attempt, sorry, I get really nervous public speaking, but what are your thoughts on attempting to create programming that includes and speaks to communities of color versus or engaging with organizations that already exist that primarily serve communities of color? It's like, do we partner? Do we create programming for, or both, and why?
I would say from my experience, both. I think in partnership and in thinking about program creation, I think for me, I always am like, go to the organizations and ask how they want to be engaged. I think I never want to like go to an organization and be like, well, this is what we think, and this is what we want to do. I think it, again, goes back to that co-creation, giving organizations agency, being open to new ideas and dreaming together. And I think like that's going to look very different for different communities. So I think if you move with that intention of like co-creating and being open, you really open up yourself for a lot of really incredible opportunities to create something you maybe didn't even imagine.
I thought of hearing you respond, do with, not do for. A subtle difference in word that has a significantly different meaning. Sixto? Martine?
Absolutely, thanks. Because I think that what I will also say that part of the opportunity out of the pandemic is that you don't have to do programs in the same way you thought you were going to do. You don't have to think that your resources are the same things that you thought it was. So that in conversation with some of the organizations that are doing that work, can you see, like, like as you said, like, what do you need? How can we actually work together? Our intention is to, like, we're interested in working with this community. You're already doing that. Is there anything that we can do in order to help you? Is there anything that you can't do that you think that we could do in order to do that? And so how, again, that we are doing this. I will also say that talk to the community, because I also, like, when working with the University of Houston, who was in the Third Ward and working with Project Row Houses for as many years as I did, I will say that there are so many people in Third Ward who are like, if I see another survey, if I see another nonprofit coming to my door telling me that they want to do for me, and that also be like, sure, these are
office have to do with return on investment, because the folks want to know how far we're taking the dollars that we have. And so we're trying to ensure that we craft our narrative to that end.
And the city is also doing a lot more collaboration across departments than they used to years ago with parks and with sanitation, and that's incredible. And it helps get the word out, and it helps demonstrate kind of value in different ways than they did before. I see a question here. Pass the mic down the row.
Sarah Cotton Nelson. I was lucky enough to get to go on the bus tour yesterday and to see, quite a bit of all of the art out in the community and around in many neighborhoods. And one of the things that we were talking about was just how much more there is to do, and that can be a very discouraging place, and that we have this tendency to for the right reasons, to want to focus on what's next, what's the gap, the constant gap that needs to be closed, which we should. And yet we also ended the evening talking about how important it is also to celebrate what also has been achieved. And so would love to hear from each of you what have been some of the bright points over the past few years, places where you see we are making progress, signs that give you hope, that we are on that bridge to a better day tomorrow if we keep working on it.
I'm a $12.5 million investment into communities of color in Houston that would not have existed 3 years ago. That we have already given $1 million. We have committed $1 million to individual artists, which is 50 individual artists, $20,000 each. That's not about projects. It's about sustained work, and that the transformation of the conversation is not around what are you going to produce for us, but how do you tell your story, and how do you tell the work that you have done more effectively? And so how can we support you in that conversation of continuing that work, and trust in the fact that you have done the work and that we are expanding. And I will also say that even in the conversations around that, and that having different program officers speak to their, we got another investment from the Brown Foundation for emerging treasures, and that is another big ask from them. And then also the fact that the Kinder Foundation does not really do arts in this way, and that they committed to this project that was funding individual artists and arts organizations of color in ways that they were not even thinking were on their radar. Those are huge successes from that component, but also on the component of seeing many of these organizations or artists actually coming together, collaborating, recognizing that there is a different future that they can build together, and that I will say that the joy that we experienced when we brought our first 25 individual artists together in Stages Theater, they did not know who each other was before that moment, because I was going to play the trick on them, like, yo, ha, ha. I know y'all don't, so but it was actually a really important and amazing moment for everybody to look in that space, to be, I know you, but I don't know so many other people, and that I actually deserve to be here. And the validation, the recognition that all of us have accomplished something. The recognition that we have an opportunity in order to name that, say that with somebody else, and actually share that and reflect that celebration back is great and is important and is really different from where we actually were before. And I think that that's actually a hope, that we can also be creating spaces for, when we actually brought the artist cohorts together, it's like, y'all can come into this space and be human. You don't have to hold up organizations or anything else. For these next 2 hours, you just get to be an individual. And that was a radical difference for some of them. So I think that it is also in some of these small moments that are transformational for us as to how do we see ourselves, how do we actually see our ways of working individually, actually create new opportunities for different people and different organizations in that component. So I think that those are some of the things for me as to it has been a privilege for me to watch and to be there in order to foster that work. And I can't wait to see how this continues to ripple out over this over the next course of the next 5 years and beyond.
I was thinking about, as you asked your question, Sarah, just the resurrection of cultural tourism. So many other municipalities depend heavily on hot tax, right? Their offices of arts and culture, offices of cultural affairs, in some instances are only funded in that vein. So you think about how tough that was on those particular municipalities and our cultural arts sector overall. And at times there's a sense of relief when you see budget impact and that you may assume an increase in hot tax contribution and how much that will benefit the folks who depend on your office for resources. So for me, it has a lot to do with cultural tourism being a priority for our stakeholders who, like Visit Dallas and on, want to invite folks to visit us and to celebrate what there is to highlight across the city and all cities, to be frank. But to see that we can begin to benefit from that source of funds, again, feels really good. And it creates a little sense of relief that some of us can return to funding programs, increase funding programs, and on with that source of funds. And that might sound quite boring to those of you who don't do that dance, but for arts administrators who share in my role, some of us are experiencing a sigh of relief in a sense that, there's the start of a rainbow being painted, and we can look forward to a bit of a brighter future in support of the artists and art organizations that we work to serve.
Yeah, I would echo definitely both of what my fellow panelists just said. I think we're moving into a moment of being able to come back together, and I think even just us being in this room and even what today was and the ways that we've been able to have conversations, I think, across the art sector, we've been doing that a lot more. More of us have been connecting and sharing, and I think, throughout the pandemic there has become a real sense of community among a lot of organizations. We're more open to sharing resources and really leaning on one another for support, and I think that will continue as we emerge out of what the last 3 years was. So I'm hopeful for more change in our sector, more equity, more inclusion, more belonging.
I'm going to ask one final question before we have one more question up here, and then be thinking about, I already told y'all, but I'll repeat it for them later so everybody knows.
Hi, I'm Kahana Bell, and I'm an engineer, so I'm kind of in a different space. I'm passionate about beauty and art, and I came into this space because I have created an innovative way to increase social impact in the Dallas community. And my question is also, before I ask my question, I did come from Georgia Tech and from Clark Atlanta, so Atlanta here in this space. And being here in Dallas, I found myself a lot in the beauty and art space, and I wanted to be able to bridge that gap in order to increase social impact by bringing those two worlds together. My question is for Martine. First of all, I want to say that you're slaying in this green suit. That's all I'm saying. You're slaying. Two questions. First question is, do you still dance? And second question is the city of Dallas still open to initiatives that are not only nonprofit but for-profit as well?
Okay. Do I still dance? So you come to a role in support of so many arts organizations and you wonder, I probably can't take class at Dallas Black because then Bruce Wood, Gail, how it's just, There's no way. And so now I have to commute. I'm looking for someone outside of the entire DFW complex because I don't want to cross paths with, you never know. I don't want to get hurt at Bruce Wood. That turns into a whole nother problem. I've not trained in dance in a long time. Like many dancers, when we were impacted by COVID and we're home, the YouTube class, it didn't resonate with me. I'm someone who gleans a lot from the energy in studio space, shared space with my peer dancers, choreographers, and on and on. And so that took me down a slippery slope away from training. And I think for those of us who are creators, dancers, artists, singers, when you come to the backstage role in arts administration, you get far, far, far away from whatever your discipline is. And so I try in practice, to incorporate that in my physical fitness routine and taking Horton for stretch, Horton technique, which is a modern technique of dance for stretch, but I've not been in a class setting since I got to Dallas. And so I'm looking for people to Mesquite. I don't know, where do I have to go? Austin. Shucks. Okay, so as it relates to doing business with for-profit. So, of course, our funding programs, as noted in our guidelines, we want to support nonprofit organizations as much as we can. And as it relates to folks who are doing business for profit, there are different unique ways that you can come to do business with the city as a vendor, of course, through procurement services and on and on. And depending on the nature of the project or program you have, that would be the order of operations we'd follow. Would be to see if you're offering services we can procure, or if this is a matter of you being a vendor that's contracting on behalf of the city, and on and on. So I would invite you to explore those roles. I'm happy to be a conduit in support of the wonderful work you're doing, and I hope you're enjoying Dallas as much as I am.
Okay, final question. Future. We talked about how we want to make sure we leave folks with something to think about for the future. And I think everyone on this stage is an artist, and many of you out in the audience are artists. And as artists, something we know how to do very well is practice. So when we think about leaving our audience today, each of you, with one thing everyone can practice, small, maybe smaller the better to make it manageable, but one thing that you could leave everyone in this audience with to practice belonging as they leave this space today, what would it be?
I guess I will go back to the earlier conversation, or the art that opened this afternoon. And the idea about a radical dream that was invited. And I guess that is a question to you all. What is your radical dream? And who are you dreaming with?
Something that I learned when I was working at a window between worlds had to do with the notion that people foster deep connections when they share painful stories with each other. So what I bring forward with respect in regard to the theme of the art of belonging would be just as a practice, not necessarily that you want to have to share something painful, but just to be as vulnerable as you can. Because in interaction with folks, generally speaking, if you're approaching someone and you're quite vulnerable, you're actually offering them an invitation to be the same. And to me, that's one of the root foundations, how you create a safe, welcoming environment that fosters belonging.
Yeah, I think I would go back to that Zapatista quote again, like the world that we want is a world where many worlds fit. And I think I would just leave you all with, continuing in the spirit of like co-creation, really being intentional. And I think also, like, you know, going out to visit different organizations maybe you've never, you know, seen before, experienced before, and just learning more about, like, the communities that you have here, I think is really important.
Thank you all so very much for being here with us today. Thank you to all of you in the audience for being present through these last 4 hours, for sharing and for asking your questions, and for what you will take from this room that may change how you work in this world in which we live. So we now get to go to happy hour. So if you all will please head downstairs to the lobby, we will get to enjoy DJ Christy Ray and some cocktails and talk about all that we learned today. Thank you for joining us.